The Mongols came to Chicago in February and lost to a blizzard. 800,000 warriors broken, not by Apache helicopters or armored vehicles, but by a National Weather Service bulletin and -28 wind chill. The Romans are arriving in February too. Same city, same weather, same blizzard coming. The difference is that the Roman legion conquered Britannia, an island of perpetual cold rain and fog. They conquered Germania, forests and freezing rivers in winter campaigns that lasted years. They built Hadrian's Wall across the top of England in conditions that would have killed most ancient armies. The Mongols had never fought in wet cold. The Romans built an empire in it. And that single difference changes everything about what happens next. The Roman force crossing the Indiana state line at 3 a.m. in February is 80,000 soldiers, smaller than the DC campaign but more specialized. The general commanding this force requested his most experienced cold weather units. The cohorts recruited from Britannia, from the Rhine frontier, from the Danube border. Soldiers who have spent their entire careers operating in exactly the climate conditions that broke the Mongol army in Chicago 4 months ago. The Roman military intelligence from the Mongol campaign, translated and distributed through the same NSA interpreter chain, contains one detail that the Roman general has studied more carefully than any other. The Mongols abandoned their horses on day 2. The Roman general has no horses to abandon. The Roman infantry legion fights on foot. The cold that killed the Mongol cavalry is an inconvenience to a legion that has been marching through cold rain since the day it was formed. The Illinois National Guard mobilization protocol, updated after both the Mongol and Roman New York campaigns, activates at 3:08 a.m. when the first sensors detect the column crossing the Indiana line. The 33rd Infantry Brigade combat team begins moving from its Springfield base 200 miles south. Estimated arrival 6 hours. The Roman column moving north on I-94 is covering ground at 4 miles per hour, Roman legionary march pace in cold weather with full kit. Chicago is 50 miles from the state line. The Romans will arrive at approximately 15 hours after crossing, giving the National Guard 9 hours of buffer that neither the Mongol nor the Roman DC campaign provided. The Chicago defense has more time than any previous campaign. What it does with that time will determine whether Chicago becomes the first city that stops the Romans before they establish a position. Hour 3. The temperature is -11 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind chill off Lake Michigan is -29. The Roman column advancing north on I-94 is marching in formation with their cloaks pulled tight and their breath visible in clouds above the column for miles. The Mongol horses began showing hypothermia symptoms within 6 hours of arriving in Chicago. The Roman soldiers, men from Britannia who have stood guard on Hadrian's Wall in January sleet, men from the Rhine frontier who have built winter camps in German forest snow, are cold. They are not incapacitated. The difference between the Mongols and the Romans in Chicago winter is not courage or toughness. It is adaptation. The Roman army that conquered cold climates developed cold weather equipment, cold weather doctrine, and cold weather logistics over centuries. The wool cloaks they are wearing are not decorative. They are the result of 400 years of iterative improvement in keeping soldiers functional in exactly this temperature. Hour 6. First contact happens differently than in any previous campaign. The Illinois National Guard, with 9 hours of preparation time, has not established a hasty roadblock like the NPD did in New York or the MPD did in DC. They have established a prepared defensive line, anti-vehicle barriers across all 6 lanes of I-94, elevated firing positions in the overpasses above the highway, a full artillery battery from the 108th Field Artillery Regiment positioned 2 miles back with a clear firing solution on the approach corridor. The Roman vanguard, advancing in column formation on the highway, encounters this defensive line at the Cook County border at 6:15 a.m. The column stops. The general, riding in the middle of the column, receives the scout report and moves forward to observe personally. He sees the barriers. He sees the elevated positions. He sees, through the pre-dawn darkness, the shapes of vehicles and weapons he doesn't recognize. He orders the column to halt and establish a defensive position on the highway. He sends 3 scout units into the fields on either side of the highway to find the flanks of the defensive line. The scouts report back in 40 minutes. The defensive line extends 800 meters on each side of the highway but ends at the suburban housing developments. It was built to cover the highway approach and nothing else. The Romans go around it through the backyards of Lansing, Illinois at 7:30 a.m., hour 8. The Romans reach the southern edge of Chicago proper, the Roseland neighborhood, at 8:45 a.m. The temperature has dropped to -14. The wind has increased to 35 miles per hour sustained. The Roman column that has been marching for nearly 6 hours in these conditions is cold, tired, and, according to the Roman medical officer's report filed that evening, beginning to show the first signs of cold weather attrition, not hypothermia. Frostbite on exposed skin, ears, noses, fingers at the extremities of the formation where the body heat generated by the marching mass of soldiers reaches less effectively. The Roman army that conquered cold climates still loses soldiers to cold climates. They just lose fewer than anyone else would, and they keep moving anyway. The 40,000 horses that the Mongols lost in Chicago, the catastrophic biological failure that broke the Mongol campaign, has not happened. The Roman soldiers are frostbitten and still advancing. That is the entire difference. Hour 10. The Chicago River presents the same obstacle it presented to the Mongols. But the Roman engineering response is completely different. The Mongols tried to cross the Chicago River on commandeered boats and improvised methods because they had no bridging capability. The Roman engineering cohort looks at the Chicago River and begins constructing a military bridge in under 2 hours using the timber from construction sites along the South Branch. Chicago has enough active construction sites on its south side to provide adequate bridging timber within a half-mile of the crossing point. The bridge is functional at 10:47 a.m. The Roman column crosses the South Branch of the Chicago River on a Roman military bridge in Chicago, Illinois, on a February morning in 2026. The engineering cohort commander marks the crossing in his log with the same notation he used for the Rhine, the Danube, and the Potomac. River crossed, no significant engineering challenges, timber adequate. Hour 12. The Roman vanguard reaches the Loop, the elevated train circuit that stopped the Mongol advance for 22 critical minutes. The L is still running. Chicago Transit Authority kept it operational for emergency civilian movement, as they did in the Mongol scenario. The Roman vanguard encounters the L at the intersection of South Wabash and East Jackson at 11:15 a.m. The train passes directly overhead at 35 miles per hour with the characteristic screech of steel on steel. The first rank of legionaries stops. The second rank collides with the first. The column compresses for approximately 90 seconds, while every soldier in the vanguard processes the experience of a metal vehicle the size of a building moving 20 feet above their heads at speed. Then the centurion commanding the vanguard, a 15-year veteran of the Rhine frontier who has seen things in Germany that most people cannot imagine, shouts the Latin equivalent of "keep moving," and the column advances. The L stopped the Mongols for 22 minutes. It stopped the Romans for 90 seconds. That difference is what 400 years of institutional military discipline looks like. Noon. The Roman force establishes its camp at Grant Park, the 313-acre park on the lakefront between the Loop and Lake Michigan. It is the most defensible position in central Chicago that the Roman general could have chosen, and he chose it within 40 minutes of seeing the city's geography from the elevated scout positions near the Loop. Grant Park has the lake on its eastern flank. Impassable, no threat from that direction. It has the museum campus on its southern edge, large stone buildings that become instant strong points. It has clear lines of fire north and west across the park's open ground. And it has the Buckingham Fountain at its center, a water source that the Romans identify and secure within the first 30 minutes of establishing the camp perimeter. The Mongols lost their horses to Chicago's weather in a camp with no defensible geometry. The Romans have chosen a camp with perfect defensible geometry and a water source at its center. They have been in Chicago for 9 hours, and they are already more fortified than the Mongols were at their peak. Day 1 ends with the National Weather Service issuing the same winter storm warning that ended the Mongol campaign. Projected snowfall 16 to 20 inches. wind speeds increasing to 50 miles per hour sustained. The storm arrives at noon tomorrow. The American military commanders who dealt with the Mongol campaign remember exactly what that forecast meant. It meant the campaign was over, that the Mongols could not survive a blizzard in an open position, and that the negotiation could proceed from a position of overwhelming weather advantage. Those commanders are now watching drone footage of a Roman camp at Grant Park that has, in 9 hours, constructed a perimeter with drainage ditches, a central command tent with fire pits for heating, organized supply storage, medical facilities, and what appears to be a fully functional Roman military camp in the middle of a Chicago park in February. The weather advantage that ended the Mongol campaign may not exist against an army that has been building winter camps for 400 years. Day 2, the blizzard arrives at noon as projected. 50 miles per hour winds driving horizontal snow off Lake Michigan directly into the eastern face of the Grant Park camp. The temperature drops to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind chill reaches minus 45, the temperature at which exposed human skin freezes in under 5 minutes, and at which even the best cold weather equipment begins to fail. The Roman camp at Grant Park does not collapse. The leather tents, the same tents Roman legions used on the Rhine and Danube frontiers, are staked with the military precision of 400 years of field experience. The fire pits in the central camp provide enough heat to keep the interior of the main tent structures above freezing. The soldiers rotate in from perimeter positions every 30 minutes. A cold weather rotation protocol developed on Hadrian's Wall that keeps exposure time below the threshold for serious cold injury. The camp does not collapse. It also does not function at full capacity. The storm that would have killed the Mongols in 6 hours is killing Roman soldiers in 18. Slowly, in smaller numbers, but killing them. Day 2 also brings the first American military assessment that anyone has made in either the Mongol or Roman campaigns that contains the word stalemate. The Roman camp at Grant Park is surviving the blizzard. It is not thriving. The cold weather attrition rate, soldiers incapacitated by frostbite and cold injury, is approximately 200 soldiers per day in blizzard conditions. At that rate, the Roman force of 80,000 soldiers would be significantly degraded in 40 days. The American military cannot assault the Grant Park position without significant casualties. The camp is too well fortified, and the blizzard makes air support impossible. The Romans cannot advance out of the camp in blizzard conditions without catastrophic cold weather losses. Both sides are stuck. The blizzard that ended the Mongol campaign in 6 hours is creating a stalemate with the Romans that could last weeks. Day 3, the blizzard lifts at 6 a.m. The Roman camp at Grant Park is intact. Covered in 18 inches of snow, its perimeter ditches filled, its approach roads drifted over, but intact. The first Roman soldiers emerge from the tents at first light and begin clearing snow from the perimeter in organized work parties. The American commanders watching drone footage see something they did not see in the Mongol campaign at any point. An ancient military force that survived a Chicago blizzard and is now clearing the aftermath with the efficiency of an organization that has done exactly this before. In northern Britannia, on the Rhine frontier, on the Danube border, the Roman legion has been doing this, surviving winter in hostile territory and continuing operations for 400 years. The blizzard was not the weapon that Chicago had against the Romans. The blizzard was just weather, and the Romans have been dealing with weather their whole institutional life. Day 5, the negotiation begins. Not because the Romans are weakened. Their position is stronger after surviving the blizzard than before it, because surviving the blizzard has demonstrated to both sides that weather will not end this campaign the way it ended the Mongol one. The negotiation begins because the Roman general sent his envoy on day 3. The morning the blizzard lifted, with a message that the NSA translators delivered to the American command post at 8:47 a.m. The message is shorter than anything sent in the New York or D.C. campaigns. It is 2 sentences. The first sentence, "We have survived your winter." The second sentence, "Let us discuss what comes next." It is the most confident diplomatic opening of any campaign and the most honest. The general is not negotiating from desperation. He is negotiating from a position of demonstrated resilience. He has proved the one thing the Americans thought would stop him, and he is using that proof as his opening move. Day 8. The negotiation at Navy Pier, chosen by the American side because it extends into Lake Michigan and creates a naturally isolated negotiating space, produces a settlement faster than any previous campaign. 3 days of talks. The Roman general's demands are familiar. Acknowledgement, status, the formal recognition that the legion conducted itself with military discipline. But he adds one demand that neither the New York nor DC generals asked for. He wants a Roman military tribune to spend 30 days embedded with an American military unit, observing, studying, learning, not as a prisoner, as a professional military observer. The American military commanders in the room look at each other. The request is unprecedented. It is also, every person in the room recognizes simultaneously exactly what a Roman military intelligence officer would ask for if given the opportunity. The answer, after 4 hours of consultation with Washington, is no. The general accepts the refusal without comment. He had expected it. The ask itself was the point, to see how the Americans made decisions under unexpected pressure. He got the answer he needed. Day 10. The Romans withdraw from Grant Park in a blizzard, a second storm that arrived overnight. They march south through 14 inches of fresh snow on I-94 in formation, in good order, at standard march pace. The American commanders, watching drone footage of 80,000 Roman soldiers marching through a Chicago blizzard back toward the Indiana line, note one thing in the after-action report that will be quoted in military academies for decades. They didn't slow down. The storm that immobilized the Mongols in 6 hours and created a 48-hour stalemate with the Roman camp did not slow the Roman withdrawal by a single mile per hour. They marched through it the way they marched through everything. Steadily, in formation, with the institutional confidence of an organization that has been doing this for 400 years and expects to be doing it for 400 more. The last Roman soldier crosses the Indiana state line at 11:47 p.m. on day 10. The temperature is -17. The wind chill is -38. The soldier is frostbitten on both ears and 3 fingers of his right hand. He is still in formation. He does not break step crossing the state line. What Chicago revealed about the Roman legion that New York and DC didn't is the most important military insight of the entire series. New York showed that the Romans could build and negotiate. DC showed that they could plan and outmaneuver. Chicago showed something more fundamental, that the Roman legion was not a collection of talented soldiers. It was a system so deeply embedded in its soldiers that it functioned automatically under conditions. A Chicago blizzard, -38 wind chill, 18 inches of snow, that would have broken any other military organization in history. The system didn't require good conditions to function. It was designed specifically to function when conditions were worst. Every military force that has ever existed was at its best in ideal conditions. The Roman legion was at its best when conditions were worst, because that is when the training, the discipline, and the institutional memory of 400 years made the largest difference over everyone else. The world that built that system is gone. The system itself somehow keeps showing up. Subscribe, because the next city is already on the march.